Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. The earth is our home. It has been this way forever, of course. It is the only home we have ever had. Whether this fact of life remains so in the future is something only the future can determine. But as of now, the earth is the only place we have ever lived. It happens that any given people may associate a particular piece of the earth to be their ancestral home by virtue of their ancestors having lived there as long as anyone can remember. The British might say this about England, and the natives of some island might say this about their island. The Jews say this about the land called Israel, just as the Japanese say it about Japan. There is believed to be some kind of natural right to these claims, regardless of whether such a right truly exists. This is simply the way things are done, at least until they are no longer done that way. But the question must be asked, who really owns the land? Who really can claim any piece of land as their particular home? What gave them this right? Is it simply the fact that they have always been there, or that they were there at some point in the past? These are sticky issues, and nobody is really 100% sure what the answers are, or if there even are answers. It is one of the strange facts of life that we take for granted, even as we know that it might not make all that much sense. It's the way we have to live. This week's Parsha is another double. The two are called Behar and Bechukotai. The first means on the mountain, a reference to God speaking to Moshe on Mount Sinai to communicate certain new laws to him. The second means in my statutes, a phrase that introduces the subject of much of the Parsha, which deals with the consequences of abiding by or disobeying the laws of the Torah. We're going to focus on the first Parsha, Behar, which deals primarily with certain particulars about living in the land of Israel. The first half of this single chapter Parsha concentrates on very specific agricultural laws and laws dealing with real estate. The agricultural section is divided into two somewhat related subsections. The first goes by the general name of Shemitah, a term that actually isn't found in the Parsha, but which is the universal Jewish way of referring to the concept. It means something on the order of leave it alone, meaning that the land should be left alone or fallow during the so-called Shemitah year. Specifically, the Torah states that there is to be no planting or harvesting of crops, nor any pruning of vineyards. These general rules have been expanded rabbinically to include many types of agricultural activities. In fact, it is pretty safe to say that virtually all agriculture is suspended to a great degree during the Shemitah year. The second subsection deals with what is called the Yovel, or Jubilee Year. This year is similar to the Shemitah year in terms of limitations on agriculture, but it also contains additional laws that involve the emancipation of slaves and returning of ancestral land to its original owners, if it had been sold to others. These additional laws were meant to ensure that the ownership of land in Israel was determined by ancestral possession, and that slavery, an abhorrent institution that until fairly recently was found almost all over the world, could only be maintained on any individual person for a limited amount of time. What were the spans of the Shemitah or Jubilee cycles? Shemitah, as clearly stated in the Parsha, would take place once every 7 years. In this way, it paralleled the days of the week with Shabbat. The Torah even describes the seventh year as Shabbat to God. So the entire cycle, as commonly understood, was 6 years of working the land normally, and a seventh year in which it was supposed to lie fallow. There was no general harvest nor any planting or pruning. According to the rabbinic understanding of things, small harvests were permitted, but only enough for what was needed for immediate purposes and not to store away or for business. It happens that in a few months is the next Shemitah year, according to the Jewish cycle. The Jubilee essentially made a larger cycle out of this 7-year cycle. It consisted of 7 7-year cycles, which made a total of 49 years. The 50th year was to be the Jubilee year. It had all the restrictions of the Shemitah year, plus the others described earlier. So in essence, there were 2 fallow years at the end of the 7th Shemitah cycle. the 7th year of the 7th cycle, and the 50th year after that cycle ended. The Jubilee had another related nuance concerning selling of land in Israel. Since agricultural real estate had to be returned to the ancestral owners in the Jubilee year, any sale was really temporary. The Torah states that these sales had to be adjusted according to the number of years remaining until the Jubilee year would come. Even though this seems self-evident, the Torah includes it as a reminder for people not to cheat one another with these limited time sales. The general sum up of all this is, quote, "Keep my statutes and my laws and do them, and you shall dwell securely on the land. And the land will give its fruit, and you shall eat to satisfaction and dwell securely upon it." This is quite an amazing promise. Keeping these laws, however counterproductive they may seem, will enable them to live more securely. By not engaging in agricultural activities for an entire year, or occasionally for 2 consecutive years, they will be guaranteed enough food to satisfy them. How was anyone supposed to actually believe this? Surprisingly, the Torah itself seems to ask this very question. Quote, "And if you say, 'What will we eat during the 7th year if we don't seed and don't harvest our crops?' The Torah immediately answers this question by stating, 'I will command my blessing to you in the 6th year, and it shall produce crops for 3 years. You shall seed in the 8th year and eat from the old produce until the 9th year. Until those crops, you shall eat from the old.'" This answer is quite interesting. It seems to state very simply that God will bless the land so that it produces enough crops during the year preceding the Shemitah year so that there will be sufficient food to cover both the Shemitah year and possibly even the Jubilee year after the 7th Shemitah year. As unlikely as this may seem, this promise is explicitly stated in the Torah. This is truly mind-boggling. Local agriculture was everything in biblical times. There was no importing of food to cover any shortfall in the harvest. If there was a drought or a famine, people starved or they left. To deliberately not work the land would seem to be nothing short of suicide. But there it is right there in the text. The promise would be fulfilled if they kept these laws. If they didn't, all bets were off. If somebody insisted that they would not submit to this apparent craziness, they may have gained the benefit of that year's harvest, but they wouldn't receive the benefit of this blessing. Why would the Torah make this outrageous demand on people's faith? Why not simply let things go according to the normal routines of agricultural, with annual planting and harvesting and occasional replenishing of the soil? Why does the Torah lay everything on the line and insist on this entire year of not working the land as a requirement for receiving this blessing? Couldn't the blessing have been given if they didn't take this entire year off from agriculture? Perhaps the answer to these questions is given in a verse that comes at the end of all this. Quote, "The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, since the land is mine. For you are foreigners and residents in my presence." While this verse seems to be a justification for restricting sales of agricultural land to a limited number of years, it also seems to be a general justification for all of these laws. The bottom line of all of this is contained in that key phrase, "The land is mine." However much you may consider yourselves to be the owners of the land, in reality, you are really nothing more than passers through, here today and gone tomorrow. This is an amazing idea. All of us, that's just those who lived in biblical Israel, are really just passing through this world. While we tend to not think of our lives in that way, it is really the truth. We almost automatically believe that if we own a piece of land, that piece of land is truly ours in some permanent sense. While we know that this is not true, we believe it nevertheless. The earth is not ours. Even a little piece of the pie that we may have some title to is not really ours. Nobody can truly own any of the earth, since it is not anybody's to dole out or to claim. We are temporary owners, either foreigners or residents, but temporary all the same. The only true owner of something as larger than life as the earth is God. If God sets the rules so that produce is magnified or diminished according to how people see their relationship to the land, who are we to question these rules? God is the owner. Perhaps there is something essential to acknowledging God's ownership of the land, something that in some mysterious way affects the products of agricultural efforts. Otherwise, we are on our own, subjecting ourselves to the whims of fortune and weather. While this may seem like a great stretch to many people, especially today, it is possible that we don't know all the rules of the game and may be deluding ourselves to believe that we do. The earth is a great gift. It is our home while we live on it, but it is not ours. As difficult as this may be to truly imbibe, it is nevertheless a fact of life. Many people may have trouble believing that the true owner of the earth is God. This is because they doubt the existence of God and cannot attribute ownership to a non-existent being. But then the question must be asked, who is the owner? The Torah has a simple answer to this question. The earth belongs to God. How we are to deal with this belief is our task. One suggestion, perhaps, is to relinquish our claim to it every once in a while and to acknowledge its true owner. Shabbat Shalom.